which is that the scent of a reproductively competent male, if it's present often enough or perhaps intensely enough, that it can trigger the onset of puberty in that female. In other words, the scent of a male that is not the father, and we think also that is not biologically related to her, can trigger earlier onset of puberty. And that effect can at least be partially buffered by her being in the presence of the scent from her biological father. Now, some of you are probably already leaping to conclusions about what this means. Should you not allow your daughter to be exposed to any males who are of reproductive age, et cetera? Is certainly not what I'm saying. There's a huge number of considerations that go into that calculation for everybody and circumstances, et cetera. But the point is that the odors of individuals, both related, in particular closely related, and non-related individuals, can shape the neural systems and the hormone systems that can trigger the onset of puberty or suppress the onset of puberty. So whether or not we're talking about onset of puberty at this age or that age, and whether or not biologically related male or non-biologically related male scents are around, et cetera, the thing I want everyone to know is that at some point during development, typically nowadays between the ages of 11 and 15 or so, again, there's variability there, the suppression of gonadotropin-releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus is removed, and then gonadotropin-releasing hormone can activate cells within the pituitary, and if you really want to know, it's the anterior pituitary in particular, and then the anterior pituitary gland, which sits at and kind of bridges the brain and the body because it allows the release of hormones into the bloodstream. That anterior pituitary is going to release two key hormones that everyone should know the name of and what they do. And when I say everyone, I mean males and females need to know about these hormones because they have an active role in both males and females. And of course, you should want to know and should know about the biology of everyone on the planet, in my opinion, because it tells you a lot more about humans than if you just focus on your own biology. But those two hormones are called luteinizing hormone, which is abbreviated LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, which is abbreviated FSH. Okay, so the simple picture that you need to have in your mind is gonadotropin releasing hormone from the brain, from the hypothalamus in particular, is causing the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. GnRH stimulates LH, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. LH and FSH travel in the blood and can access all the cells and tissues of the body. This is one of the incredible things about hormones is that many hormones, and LH and FSH are included in this group, can travel into cells and they can actually change the genetic expression of those cells. They can change which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And they can also attach to the surface of those cells and make those cells take on different properties. So they can mature those cells. So for instance, a good example of this outside of the context we've been talking about is the hormone testosterone can travel to the hair follicle and can stimulate changes in the genes of the cells of the hair follicle that can make hair grow. A different hormone, estrogen, can travel to the cells of the breast tissue and activate genes that control enlargement of the cells of the breast tissue. Prolactin, a different hormone, can travel to the mammary ducts and control the production and the secretion of milk. And in males, that can actually happen in certain cases, although it's rare. But prolactin can also travel to areas of the brain that control libido, for instance. And so you'll never forget it, males, elevated levels of prolactin are actually what set the refractory period after ejaculation and prevent erection for some period of time. So you'll never forget prolactin. The point being that different hormones have different effects on different cells depending on what cells those are, right? Estrogen or estradiol is going to have different effects on the breast tissue than it would on skin, although it has effects on both. Similarly, when LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, travel in the blood to the gonad, and the gonad is an ovary, it will have a certain set of consequences. And when luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone travel in the blood to a gonad, and that gonad happens to be a testy, then it will have a different set of biological implications. So let's focus now on what happens when LH and FSH arrive at the ovary. And let's assume now that we're talking about a female who has already undergone puberty, or perhaps we could even frame this in the context of a female who is about to undergo puberty. FSH and LH are now able to be released because she's undergoing puberty, but the same set of processes essentially would occur for any point from puberty onward until menopause, which is the depletion of that vault, that ovarian reserve of all those immature eggs. I'd like to take a brief break and acknowledge our sponsor, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one vitamin mineral probiotic drink that also contains digestive enzymes and adaptogens. I started taking Athletic Greens way back in 2012, so that's 10 years now of taking Athletic Greens every single day. So I'm delighted that they're sponsoring this podcast. The reason I started taking Athletic Greens and the reason I still take Athletic Greens is that it covers all of my foundational nutritional needs. So whether or not I'm eating well or enough or not, I'm sure that I'm covering all of my needs for vitamins, minerals, probiotics, adaptogens to combat stress, and the digestive enzymes really help my digestion. I just feel much better when I'm drinking Athletic Greens. If you'd like to try Athletic Greens, you can go to athleticgreens.com/Huberman. And for the month of January, they have a special offer where they'll give you 10 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3, K2. Vitamin D3 and K2 are vital for immune function, metabolic function, hormone health, but also calcium regulation and heart health. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Huberman to claim their special offer in the month of January of 10 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3, K2. Okay, so we're now going to talk about ovulation and menstruation, and let's just remember what this is all about. This is all about creating the potential for an egg to be fertilized, and that egg needs to have half of the chromosomal pairs. So no pairs, but it's got to have 23 chromosomes just from mom. And we need to position that egg so that the egg can be met by the sperm, and that sperm can penetrate that egg and donate its 23 individual strands of chromosomes to that egg so that you can bring together the DNA of dad and the DNA of mom. So the ovulatory and menstrual cycle occurs when luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone have been released. And the ovulatory/menstrual cycle, and here I have to kind of pick what I want to call it. I guess to be really accurate, we would just call it the female reproductive cycle, but that includes underneath it, but the menstrual cycle, as it's sometimes called, and the ovulatory cycle. So you decide. I'm going to interchangeably discuss the ovulatory cycle and the menstrual cycle. The problem is when you say menstruation, people often think about just the period, the shedding of the uterine lining when fertilization has not occurred. So if I start saying ovulatory cycle, just keep in mind I'm referring to the entire thing. Now, this is probably also a good opportunity to say that if you heard that the ovulatory/menstrual cycle is 28 days long, that's true in some cases, but that's not always true. It's on average 28 days long. There are some females for which the ovulatory cycle will be shorter, it can be as short as 21 days, and other females for which it will be 35 days long. Shorter than 21 days and longer than 35 days is rare, although it does occur. One of the key things when thinking about fertility is if you talk to OBGYNs who are focused on fertility, which I have in anticipation of this episode, they'll tell you that whether or not your cycle is 21 days long or 35 days long is not as much of an issue necessarily unless it's happening to become much shorter or much longer in a kind of erratic way. So if you're somebody who's consistently had 23-day long cycles and all of a sudden you're having 30-day long cycles, that's not necessarily an indication of anything bad. But if it's 21 days one month and it's 30 days the next month and that's 17 days the next month, or even if it's always falling within that 21 to 35 day long cycle, but it's very variable from each month or every other month or so, you probably want to talk to your OBGYN because that could indicate a number of different things. Which things could it indicate? Well, that will become clear as I spell out the biology in a bit more detail. Okay, but this idea that the menstrual cycle, ovulatory cycle is always 28 days, that's just false. That's just not true. I should also mention that there is a common misconception that because the average menstrual cycle is 28 days, indeed the average is 28 days, and the lunar cycle is 28 days. And of course, there is real biology to support the fact that the lunar cycle can in fact impact certain aspects of human behavior. It does, and we'll talk about lunar cycles in a future episode. But there is zero data to support the idea that the menstrual cycle and the lunar cycle are linked in any kind of causal way. I'm sorry to break it to you. The lunar cycle and the tidal cycles at the ocean are definitely linked in ways that are super interesting, related to the tilt of the Earth and the pull of gravity of different planets. And it's an incredible story. And